Okay, hey everyone, welcome back to the program. So in this segment, we're going to talk about, I don't even know how I did that. It was like
Segment.
segment,
Segment.
segment. Uh, we're going to talk about the hypnagogic state, and we're also going to talk about doing the wake back to bed technique with the lucid dream meditation. And specifically because like I've found that to be one of the most effective techniques for me at this stage of becoming lucid will be like waking up in the middle of the night, doing the lucid dream meditation, and then going back to bed. And Brian was saying, well, ultimately, like we're progressing toward being able to consistently do a wake induced lucid dream, which means like we pass from the waking state through the hypnagogic state in when that transitions into a lucid dream, and we form that lucid dream into a place that we always want to start from, right? So that's a that's a that's an awesome
Awesome
kick-ass,
goal.
amazing goal that we want. But like, I know for
I
me,
can see you struggling with those words. I can
I'm
see
like,
you.
I don't want to say it. Just because like that initially, I mean, it's like, why do we, it's like, why isn't everybody just falling asleep consciously and having lucid dreams? It's like that, even that hypnagogic state. And then as the hypnagogic state progresses and we start to lose more body awareness and transition into dreaming, I mean, that's that whole thing you're talking about getting these sensations of falling, or it's like those things can be very odd or uncomfortable. And so at least for me at this stage, it's like, okay, I get up, I'll do this wake back to bed, I'll do the lucid dream meditation for 24 minutes or whatever, and I've kind of put myself into a state where my mind is focused but relaxed, and I've already primed it with the idea of having a lucid dream, and then I'm just going back to bed and letting myself fall asleep. So but even then, oftentimes, like, I'll do that, and then I'll find myself being semi-conscious in the middle of the transition, or in this deep hypnagogic state or whatever, and then getting, as we've talked about before, that sensation of like vibrations or electricity in the body, or odd sounds or loud sounds, disturbing noises. And so on that bridge between waking and dreaming. So I don't know, I think it'd be great before we transition into the next stage of the program, where we're going to start to talk about stage 2, doing more wake, trying to train ourselves to do more wake initiated lucid dreaming. Yep. And all that. I feel like it's good to just kind of touch on these ideas of like, that anything that we can do to do the wake back to bed technique, where we do a meditation and focus our minds or prime ourselves for dreaming, can be really effective. But also, like, what's the deal with this hypnagogic state, and anything you might have to say about that.
Okay. That's a tall order.
Yeah, man.
There's a lot there.
Get to it. It's like, okay. Wind them up. I don't know.
No. It's like, okay, so the hypnagogic state, let's start with that, because that's sort of a transitional piece, right? So, and technically it's right in that territory where you're awake and you're sort of suspended on the way into sleep. So it's kind of like one of those things where, I mean, if people have had this experience before, where they've been very relaxed, they almost feel like they're sleeping, but they're still aware of their room or the bed that they're in, or that type of thing. But they feel like, wow, you feel like you're not quite asleep, but you're not really awake either. But you have a certain limited awareness of where you are, what's going on. That's a hypnagogic state, right? Where it's like that transition. And so for most people, you're not in that very long, right? It's like, it literally is a transitional piece into sleep or waking up out of sleep, right? So it doesn't normally last very long for people, but with a little intention, you can pause it in that territory. And there are a lot of things that you can learn from there, right? So One, of course, is that horrible word that everybody hears me say on a regular basis, but and that word is balance, right? So it's being able to balance yourself, your mind between those two states, right? Where you're not quite awake, but you are aware somewhat of your surroundings, and you're not quite asleep, right? So you haven't transitioned into no awareness or body awareness or any of that, right? So you're sort of holding yourself in that place. It's kind of like, I think of it like floating if you're a swimmer, right? So it's kind of like in that place where you're being supported by the water, but you're not actually trying to move anything to keep yourself on the surface or move forward or in any direction, right? You're just sort of like bobbing there halfway between. And so it is a good practice if you are a swimmer or you're a place where you have access to a pool. You can even put yourself in that state, right, and learn how to float with the bare minimum motion. Either when I learned to do it, it was either like you float like a jellyfish, right, with your back up, and and so you have to really slowly lift your head so that you can get air, and then put your head back down again, and you float there, right? So it's like there's no, because if you just lift your head, you just sink, right? And so there's a good thing too, right? It's like, and if you swim, you keep most of your, you have your body above the water line, right? So, and so you have to become aware of that, right? So, but this floating state, it sort of puts you in this, a weightless category, right? Or you can float vertical, right? Where you can just float and just the top of your head is there, and just with a very subtle motion, even lifting your chest, you can bring your nostrils above the water line so you can take a breath, and then as you hold your breath and just sort of relax again, you just sort of bob back down. And so there's all these different ways of doing it, but it gives you good training in just relaxing and sort of being in that middle territory. If you start flailing around, obviously you're either going to go up to the surface and make a bunch of splashes, or have to swim in order to get your head above water, right, so that you can breathe. And it's a great place to learn that sort of juxtaposition between those two worlds, right? And in between, what's the primary thing? You have to relax, right? If you're too tense or in any way, or too agitated, it doesn't work, right? You can't keep yourself in a place where you're just naturally going to bob up to the surface. So you have to learn how to do that. And it's a good training tool to learn this. But that's the hypnagogic state as well. It's sort of like you're in between. And if you can recognize it and sort of hold yourself there. And how do you hold yourself in the hypnagogic state? Well, you'll find that there are certain things that will grab your attention, right? Or that you can focus your attention on. Now, if it happens to be a visual source, a lot of times in the hypnagogic state, you end up with a lot of colorful imagery. And most times it's just geometric shapes or forms of some sort. They're not real intelligible, or it's not like words or anything like that, or scenery. It's not usually like that. It's, colorful geometric forms, much like if people, the way they talk about psychedelics, it's sort of in that territory. And they repeat. And so focusing on that can sort of give you a visual reference to hold you in that place, right? Unless it starts to change into, the visuals start to change into something else, right? I mean, for me, that's how I transitioned to a wake-induced lucid dream, where I, focus on them in a certain way that it turns into scenery or an image of a place that I want to move into, right? So, but there's also, a strong audible, auditory sense, heightened auditory sense. So you can listen intently, and sometimes you'll hear like the whispers of a conversation, or a conversation that seems far away, but you can just barely hear the words, that people are talking, but you can't hear exactly what they're saying. And so by focusing on that, you can sort of hold yourself in that place as well. And it sort of keeps you, sort of in this equilibrium where you can sort of I hate to say like wander around it, because it's not like you're mobiling through it, right? Intentionally. It's just more like, again, that floating state where you're sort of in between and you can recognize, oh, this is the waking area. And, oh, and, if I go a little bit deeper, I'm probably going to fall right into sleep and probably right into a dream, to be honest with you.
And do you think that there's value in, like, I mean, we pass through the hypnagogic state every time we fall asleep, right? Even from the first time that, we go to bed and lay down to fall asleep, we pass through that. Most of the time it's unconscious. Do you think there's value in, like, just kind of trying to explore that space?
I think there is value to that. I think for me anyway, the primary value is in learning to suspend yourself between two different states and recognize both of them at once, and what you need to do, how you need to relax, how you need to position yourself there in some ways, what things will keep you tied to that place, like a visual, focus or auditory focus, right? That will hold you in that place. And so by holding an aspect of your senses in that place, basically. Because
Yeah,
if you focus from that place, and you can prove this to yourself if you have the time and the patience to do it, right? It's like, getting yourself into that hypnagogic state, trying to identify it so that you can hold yourself there. And then, at a certain point, put a little more focus, like just stretch out your mind to encompass the room that you're in. Like, you're in your bed and you're sleeping. So if you just stretch your mind out to sort of, almost like, okay, I'm positioned in this way in my bed. The headboard's here, the footboard's there. My bed is in this place in the room. As soon as you start to branch toward that direction, you're probably going to come to a more wakeful state, almost always, right? If I start to focus more on that, like, oh, I kind of have a sense of my body. I wonder if I can relax it even more. It's not really the way that I feel my senses, my tactile senses. But if I focus a little bit more on letting that go and relaxing, it's that letting go and sort of feeling yourself sort of move deeper into relaxation, you're probably going to transition more into sleep, right? So it's like finding that place. How far can I go? Can I bring it back? How far up can I go without waking? Can I bring it back? Where will this visual tether take me to? Maybe this auditory stimulus, if I really focus on that, will it bring me closer? There is some territory to suss out there, and some people really make a whole practice of being in that transitory stage, right? Like,
right.
people have, it's a visionary state, all of that. I find, I mean, my experience hasn't been that. I'm not doubting theirs. I utilize it for more of the ability to find balance and to be able to hold myself in that balanced state for an extended period of time.
Right. And I can, I don't want to, it's like, I guess it's like, I kind of feel like a little bit of an invalid when it comes to this. Cause like when you're talking about being in that hypnagogic state, I mean, for me at least, and I'm just mentioning it, I don't want to predispose anybody to think that it's difficult or anything like that. I more just want to say, like, for anybody that hasn't had much experience in that space, or maybe finds it difficult, like I'm in that boat right now. Like whenever I experience any hypnagogic, whether it's any kind of imagery, which at this point is kind of rare, but more like auditory, especially sounds, or like, oh, like you said, like, okay, you might hear like a snippet of a conversation or some noises or whatever. I always find that to be like, when I become aware that I'm in that state and that I'm having those sensations and those internal experiences, and I'm kind of halfway in between, I have an automatic response of like jolting out of it or shocking myself out of it, because because I feel so unnerved by it. Like it's, you know, and so I think that's why. And the other thing is, I find that I don't usually uh, progress consciously into that state or into that territory unless I've done some meditation before laying down to do that. And I think that for me anyway, that may just be that, you know, the like I said about the, you know, the lucid dream meditation prior to laying down to go to sleep is kind of like needing that time to relax and focus my mind in a more intentionally wakeful state before laying down to actually achieve consciousness during that transition, which
Right.
maybe that's just, yeah, like I said, you know, maybe I just need the extra training wheels or whatever to even move into that space consciously. But even so, even when I do find myself in that automatic response of being unnerved by the realness of those internal senses or visuals or auditories, and then the like the automatic like jolting myself back from like, you know, like having that less body awareness. Do you feel like that's pretty common for people? I mean, I feel like that's probably why
It's common for me.
it was common for you.
Oh yeah.
So you had to do some
Because
training to get used to being in that transitional state.
and that's where the repetition comes in. But I thought, oh, you know, that's so interesting. I mean, it was a little scary in the beginning, you know, because my specific experience was, this was when I was trying to use that hypnagogic state to transition into a wake-induced lucid dream. So, and so I thought, well, you know, I wasn't having a lot of success transitioning it. And I thought, well, maybe it's because I'm not spending enough time there. Maybe I'm not spending enough time in that place, that neutral middle territory. It's kind of like limbo, you know, the way I think of it, you know. So, you know, so it's, I remember doing that. And I remember it was an afternoon, a late afternoon, and nobody was around. So I don't typically do this, but I said, well, I'm going to try this, but instead of trying it in a chair or instead of trying it on the couch or lying on the floor or whatever, I'm going to lie in bed and do this. And I had this whole scenario in my head of how that was going to work out, you know, like my plan going in, right? And so, and I started to relax, and I started to go through the process and started to get into, you know, that hypnagogic state, and recognized it, and then just sort of held myself there. And so I wasn't really focused on the auditory part. I was focused more on the visual part. And it was just sort of like, you know, what we would think of now as not being very sophisticated, sort of screensaver, multiple color geometrics coming at me, you know, and just sort of like fading, and then another one coming, you know, and just sort of strings of them happening like that. Pretty, but of no consequence. So I was just sort of focused on those and saying, okay, can I stay in this state? Can I stay in this state? And I wonder how long is long enough. I don't really have a sense of time, but it feels like I've been here for a while. And I remember a few like almost like auditory things starting to happen, but I was ignoring them completely. Like I was totally focused on the visual because I thought this is a good tether. It's holding me in this place, and I'm pretty balanced. And I think that at some point I can try to make this transition, you know, into a lucid dream. And all of a sudden, it was a male voice, and deep and bold and very stern, but used my full name like my mother would when I was bad. You know, like, you know, half rage, half shock, you know, that I did something really bad. And so, but it was this, you know, my dad never did that. You know, my mom would do that. But here's this male voice, very deep, very stern, very commanding, saying my full name as if I had done something wrong to get my attention. And shocked the crap out of me. I mean, immediately woke up. I was like hyperventilating. My heart was pounding, horribly. And I thought, oh my God, what did I just step into? And so it took me a little while to get back to that. It took me probably a week or so before I could settle down enough to say, like, okay, let me try that again. I'm still here, so obviously it couldn't have been so bad. And so I did it, and that didn't repeat, right? But there were other times when it was like that, and it's amazing how when a voice that you don't recognize calls your name, how instantly you can be jolted out of whatever you're doing. And it's a little on the shocking side, right? So for me, that was basically, and to this day, I still have those occurrences, but they're not as shocking as they were in the beginning. It was very disconcerting in the beginning. So, and I feel like now it's almost a trigger, to say, like, okay, you've been here long enough, move along. Nothing else to see here.
Mm.
So, but yeah, it can be disconcerting. And so it's about, again, saying, okay, is there anything really harmful about this? Or am I wasting my time? And I don't think anything that trains balance is wasting your time. There's so many things this is difficult. It's a difficult training, right? I mean, imagine, if I said to somebody who didn't know anything about this, hey, have you ever tried to like hold yourself between sleep and wakefulness? They'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean? I just, sometimes I lay awake and I don't sleep well. I'm like, no. I mean, like, you're just starting to fall asleep and you just stay in that place. I think, most people wouldn't have a clue about what that is. And, or that you would even be able to like hold yourself in that place. It'd be like it's kind of like sleep paralysis, right? It's like, it freaks people out when it happens to them. You're awake and conscious, but you're paralyzed, right? So your brain rhythms are still in that delta phase where your limbs are paralyzed. You can breathe, obviously, and all of that stuff, but you're not going to move around. It's incapacitating you so that you can heal, right? Or when you're jumping out of a window in a lucid dream, you're not jumping out of your bedroom window. So it's like there's a safety mechanism there, right? So, but it can be terrifying when you're conscious of it, and it only lasts a minute or two. But it's still a pretty terrifying minute or two, thinking that you're paralyzed and you can't move when you've given yourself the command to move.
It's just amazing, like how much of these kind of automatic fear responses that we have like built into us almost, or that we come to the practice with, that we have to overcome and train ourselves to go beyond, to get used to these odd sensations. Because it's like, I want to have this like amazing spiritual experience of being outside my body, or talking to some spirit, or seeing energy, or or being conscious from waking to sleeping and fly, or or wouldn't that be cool to see the geometric patterns that I see, in full detail behind hypnagogic, in my hypnagogic state. But it's like, but as soon, at least for me, it's like when those things start to come on, it's like it's almost like it's like responsive, like sheer terror. It's just
it's like another part of you starts screaming like a little girl and like waking up like yes, like
it's ridiculous.
But remember, we're hardwired for survival, and so anything that would feel threatening to us in any way, and strange is threatening, right? It's not familiar, it's not family, right? It's not something that's common for you. So anything like that, the first natural response isn't going to be like, oh, let's just relax and see what happens here. No, it's going to be, get the hell out, and look from a safe distance and say like, oh, friend, not foe, right? And so this is a natural response. We're not going to get over that except by repetition and putting ourselves back in that scenario.
Because again, we've talked, like people talk about hallucinations, right? And I feel like especially in our culture, the idea of a hallucination is like this really scary thing that like nobody wants to have happen, or it's like you're seeing something that's not there, or like, okay, you're crazy, like you're done, like you're toast, you know, or whatever. But and being in a hypnagogic state, and as those auditory hallucinations, for lack of a better word, or internal experiences start to become more real, whether it's auditory or visual, it's like, I mean, you're basically you're having these auditory or visual, what people would call hallucinations. And so
Sure.
it's like, and the oddness of them starting to take on clarity and reality just as real as your physical senses is like, it's just amazing to me how disconcerting it is,
Oh,
even
it's
if you go into
unnerving.
it with an understanding of like, I'm going to have this is likely to happen, this is kind of what it might be like, this, you know, as soon as it starts to happen, it's like, ah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and so it's that repeated sort of induction that sort of nullifies it. It's like if you do it one time, it's like, oh no, that's not a good thing. You know, it's like you do it a couple times, it's like, okay, I'm still having that response, but you're not taking it as deeply, you know, disconcerting as you normally would. It'd just be like, oh damn, that happened again. Man, how am I going to get out of that? So you're analyzing it. It's not just a blind, you know, fear of running up a tree or whatever, you know. So um, and so with repeated incursions like that and sort of saying, okay, well, it's been 6 times and I haven't, you know, been eaten or whatever yet. I mean, I'm not trapped or anything like that. I wake up every time. I'm
Still in one piece.
still in one piece. Exactly. All of those things, which, you know, we can joke about, but the, you know, the conscious mind is very aware of that. It's like, oh, okay, well, it looks like, okay, that's odd, but it's not harmful to you. So,
Even though like the sensations can feel like they are, or this, or the sounds that you hear, you know, it's amazing to me how often as I've experienced that state so far, that like it's not just that it's disconcerting, it's that even the content of the sensations or the things that I'm hearing or the feelings that I'm having, it's like, you know, you're talking about, oh well, I didn't get eaten, and that sounds like on the surface a ridiculous statement to make, because it's like, okay, well, I know I'm not going to get eaten by a tiger when I'm laying in bed in this hypnagogic state. But I mean, I've had times where I'm like, am I going to, you know, the sense, if I, it's like, you're not, it's just so dramatic that it's almost like that you are getting torn apart or something, or that you're, you know,
yeah.
or that there's the a similar fear response viscerally as if it were. So it's like, what's
Sure.
up with that? Like, why, you
Well,
know?
I mean, you know, think about it. I mean, again, like, you know, mental rehearsal, right? If we want to take it back a step, mental rehearsal, where we're using, in our case, you know, like the lucid dream meditation, but mental rehearsal could be, you know, we've done it for a long time, but, you know, let's say the sports industry has used it for quite some number of years too, right? Where they know from psychology that the brain is functioning and firing whether I'm looking at that thing or, you know, being performed, even if it's myself. It works even better if it's yourself. Or, you know, let's say I've run 100 meters and I'm analyzing it, and then I'm watching the very best 100-meter runner ever, you know, run it, and that my brain is connecting the two, and the pathways that it remembers from me doing it physically, it's firing those again as I'm watching somebody else run, and I'm analyzing, there's their gait, this is how their foot falls, this is, you know, there's where their arms are, this is where their breathing is, you know, all of those things. It's like those pathways are being, you know, opened and widened and conducting quicker responses to all these things. That we know that this progresses the training, physical training. So, you know, if that's the case, and that's literally, you're just watching something, you know, it's on a screen. I mean, you consciously know you're watching a loop film or whatever it is, right? You, even if you're closing your eyes and doing it in your mind over and over again, you know you're closing your eyes and you're running a scenario in your mind. When you're in the hypnagogic state or in a lucid dream, you're completely immersed. Think about how much more real that is to your mind. It's as real as here, right? All aspects of it are, there's, depth and width and height and all of these things, right? It's like there's colors and images that things that you know and things that you don't know. And so, but it's all extremely real. How much more saturated, sensory wise is that going to be for you? And how much more response are you going to have than just watching a film or running a loop in your head of this? And if you don't, if that makes your neurons fire in a certain pattern, what do you think's happening when you're in a place? I mean, there are people now that, from, like, just as another example, right? There are people now that get VR sickness, right? They can't handle that surround sort of in-depth imagery, right? They get dizzy, or, they lose their equilibrium, they lose their balance. So it's extremely dramatic. And if anybody's not tried one of those, I highly recommend trying it, because it's like, there's one, I don't know, a friend of mine had one. So he was like, oh, you got to try this thing. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. So I'm thinking, oh, here's all this training, whatever. And it's like, you're on the Empire State Building with a steel girder sticking out, and, you have to walk on it. You're on the carpet, it's not a steel girder and you're looking down, and your body is responding as if you were on the damn steel girder, right? And so they have little props there too, like a little flag at the end, whatever, and all of a sudden you see the flag starting to wave, and you feel the breeze pushing you, all of that stuff, right? You look down, you get the same vertigo, you get the same, sensations as if you were actually out there, and the fear responses come up, right? And all that. You're not going like, oh, this is the carpet, I can just jump off. Yeah, you can override that, but really, if you're, when you're totally immersed like that, it takes some skill to do that. You really struggle to not fall off that damn girder. And
Right.
so,
So the same with all of this stuff, right? It's like our conscious awareness is so trained at this point to be connected to the senses and the patterns that we're used to engaging our sensory experience with. So anytime we start to manipulate or change or transition our senses into a different experience than what we're conditioned to be normal or stable or whatever, it's like that's when those things kick in, those fear responses. And that's,
yeah, because it's unfamiliar, right? You're stepping into the unknown. And
yeah.
so, and the immediate response, because you're trying to survive first, right? And your conscious mind is all about survival, right? It's like, pull back and see, come to a safe location and observe from a different place. So, that's sort of that thing. And so where would you go from there? Well, the safest place is just to wake yourself up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, another response would be run, go deeper. It's not the instinctual response, right? But you can train it.
I'll let you know when I get to that point.
It's that part, right? So that, like, it's always been that calling my name that focuses me in that place. And so if not, I'm just transitioning, right? So, but it's like, it's calling my name that stops me in that place to, to figure out what's going on, right? Or alerts me to, like, am I staying here too long? Am I what, right? So, and it took a while for me to do the mental rehearsal to say, like, okay, when somebody calls your full name, even in a stern voice, your first response should be what? Not, bah, and just pop out of the dream, right? So it's like, because I mean, we've all had nightmares where we woke up and our heart was pounding and we were sweating, and and you really didn't want to go back to sleep because it seems so real to you. And you, as a logical person, you're going, okay, I'm in my room, I'm sleeping, it was a nightmare, it was a bad dream, it was a really horrific dream, but it was a dream. There's nothing, I'm going to get up, get a glass of water, go to the bathroom, whatever, and go back to sleep. if I can. And it might take you a long time to be able to do that, right? But we can, and you see, it's so interesting to me because we're fighting with ourselves about that. But at the same time, we're also logical people that we can literally say, but what overrides logic? Fear. Strong emotion overrides logic, right? So it's like in that sense, your fear response is taking over, saying, maybe sleep isn't the best thing for you tonight. Maybe sitting up on the couch and watching reruns of Johnny Carson would be better. What's the thing that's the farthest from that event that I could possibly get to deflect me to knowing that everything's okay? How long is it going to take my heart rate to go down, my breathing to go down, all of those things, stop sweating, whatever it is, right? To come back to normality. But sleeping may not be, depending on how traumatic it is, sleeping may not be on the agenda for the rest of the night unless you fall asleep in the couch or whatever. It's not often that you flip back into something that dramatic, right? Because your mind won't let you. Most times you're too terrified of it. So anyway, that mental rehearsal, can come in handy in that case. So it's like, what is it? Is it the sensations or the noise or whatever it is? Isolate that. You can burn it with the burning meditation, right? It's another way to kind of help take some of that away, give yourself a little bit better perspective, burn off the dross around it. And then, the burning meditation, there's also the mental rehearsal, right? Where it's like, okay, this has happened too many times in a row. What is the response that I want for this? Does, like for me, the calling the name, instead of me just waking up sharply, it's like inquiring, like I'm acknowledging you. What do you want? Whatever that is. Usually nothing happens from that point, right? It's just sort of like, I'm like, okay, now I need to transition. So is it a part of my, subconscious that's saying, hello, are you going to stay up there all night? We've got stuff to do down here. So, are you coming, or you hang in there in limbo for a while? So, I usually take it as one of those things, but if my immediate response and my normal response would be just to sort of jump out awake, well, that's not conducive to transitioning into something more controlled. So for me, the way to, almost make it an unconscious trigger, to make it, go in there and say like, okay, so your response when somebody calls your name is, what do you want? Of which there's rarely ever a response, so it's more like, I think it's more like just to wake me up and say like, okay, you've been here long enough. You need to transition into, or get out, one or the other. So for me, that's what I think about that. But I really think that that hypnagogic state and being able to find the balance in that place, first of all, it's a stepping stone to lucidity, right? It's sort of like a deep trance state, if you will. And so that can help us here with our meditations, being in that place, right? And in that place, it can help us sort of hold that balance so that we can then, truly just wakefully transition into the lucid dream, right? And we'll go over how we do that, or different ways to do that. But it's definitely one of those options, right? So, but we do it controlled, not just haphazardly. That's, for me, that's always been important. So.
Great. Cool. And while we're still working on just lucid dreaming once a week, anything where we do like a wake back to bed with some type of meditation and then returning to sleep is probably of value.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like, again, everybody will be a little bit different in what they use, right? I mean, well, I know for you, it's been very helpful to do the lucid dream meditation, right? So it's like a primer before you go into and then go back to sleep, and that sort of helps you transition. And that's a good idea. There are lots of other ways to sort of prime the pump like that, right? It doesn't have to be just the lucid dream meditation. It can be any snippet. Like I've used, like, let's say segments of lucidity, like let's say short places where I was lucid for 5 seconds, and then but then I woke, right, or went into a regular dream. So I'll take those little snippets, because I do write those down in as much detail as possible, and I'll just, again, mental rehearsal. So at night I'll relax, I wake up, go to my chair or whatever, do the relaxation, and then, you know, really short one, because I'm just got out of bed, right? I don't have to go through a 20-minute relaxation to do that, right? So I'm just relaxing, and then run that mental rehearsal of like, oh, and, you know, here's this little snippet of me waking up. I'll just give you one. I woke up in a shop that was like an alchemy, old style alchemy laboratory. It might have been because I was looking at all these pictures at one point of all these old labs. And so, and I thought, oh, this is awesome. And so I'm looking in the drawers, and there's nobody in there, right? And then the door opens, and the door opened to like a sidewalk with tons of people, like in the middle of the city. Like, here's this, what I would have said was like 14th, 15th century, you know, shop. And this door opens, and it's like a New York City street with all these people in trench coats walking by. And I don't know if you know who this person, I don't even know why I know who this person is, but Al Roper, the weather guy on like the day, what is it? The like Good Morning America show or whatever, you know, and he was really thin. And at the time he was really heavy. He'd gone from like a really heavy guy to a really thin guy, and he had a trench coat on, and he came in and he looked at me and he said, "You got to come with me." And then I was like, it was so incongruent that I just woke up. I was like, damn, I wanted to spend more time in that lab. And what the hell was Al Roper doing in my lucid dream? So, but it's kind of one of those funny things, and I've done that several times since, right? So I would, you know, then use that little snippet, because it was really, I mean, it sounded like it was a long thing because I was explaining it, but it was really just like what I would say was a few seconds of lucidity, you know, moving around and doing this and doing that. Couldn't have been more than 10 or 20 seconds. And so, but in that time, I had a pretty detailed memory of what I did and how I did it. So I would just use that and accentuate the senses, like visually, what were all the things that were in there, and, you know, then tactilely, what did it feel like when I touched this, and if I moved into it, could I, you know, touch more of these things and pick up the glassware, and, you know, is there anything, what was the smell, what was, you know, all of those things. And as you enhance those senses, right, it's like you're priming the pump. You're sort of becoming a little bit more excitable about it because it's pretty cool, and at the same time, but not so overly so that you're waking yourself to, you know, agitation. And so that's the trick, again, that balance point, right? So as I'm doing that, it's sort of priming the pump, and then I'll just let myself go to sleep. And with that running repeatedly in my head, right? I'm just running that mental rehearsal in my head, and then seeing if it, you know, will bring me to that place again. And so, and that's, I mean, that's a successful way of doing that, right? It doesn't have to be a full blown, you know, 10-hour extravaganza lucid dream, right? It can be like a snippet, and then you're just enhancing it and putting more senses, more attention on it, and embellishing it, making it deeper, more saturated with your senses. And then you're giving it more value that way, right? And so, and again, the things that have the most value are, you know, sort of presented to you in your dream as, you know, as a thing. And so it gives you a great option of being able to get into lucidity, especially if you're not going to do the wake induced, where you're trying to guide yourself directly without losing consciousness. If you're going to do the wake back to bed, then this is a nice way to prime the pump and sort of just keep that movie rolling in your mind, that rehearsal, as you're going off to sleep, and until you're falling asleep with that. There's a great chance that that's just going to be produced in your mind, and you're going to move right into a dream like that. And that by recognizing it as that snippet, because it was so close to the time that you went to bed, it's going to be a trigger to wake you into lucidity, which is a great place to take off from.
Nice. Cool. All right. Well, that's great. And yeah, I definitely, I'm glad we covered those two things. And And yeah, great, man. Thank you.
You've got a ton of stuff to work with now.
Yeah,
Little
I'll say.
extras, a little extras to keep you from screaming in the middle of the night. Kira will be yelling at me, and saying like, "What'd you do to him? He wakes up every night screaming." It's just training. Don't worry. It's just training.
Exactly.
So there you have it.
Cool. All right. Well, that'll wrap up this segment. Thanks. And we'll see you guys on the next one.
Sounds great.